So we've got a little bit more to talk about, and we can end today's interview. Dan Vogel, are you back?
Yes.
How are you feeling?
Great. I can't believe there's more to talk about.
Oh my gosh. Well, with 19 books, what are you talking? Of course there's more to talk about. But now we're 12 hours into this interview. If you're not careful, you're going to break the record for number of hours on a Mormon Stories podcast.
That's probably not good.
It's super good. All right. The next thing I want to talk about, if it's okay. Just to recap, in our original 3 hours on the Book of Mormon with Dan Vogel, Dan, you talked about the Book of Mormon Witnesses. It's pretty clear that so when they report to have hefted the plates and felt the plates or seen the angel, we have from Martin Harris in 1838 that they did that with their spiritual eyes. Is there anything else you want to say about the Book of Mormon Witnesses, the three Nate witnesses and their testimony around, the angel and the plates that you think hasn't been covered so far?
Oh, just that I think I mentioned this already, that John Whitmer was interviewed by Theodore Turley in 1838 in Missouri. And Theodore Turley asked, how could he be an apostate when he's one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon? And, if he had denied his testimony, and John Whitmer said no, that they were shown to me by the power of God, by a supernatural power. So he's one of the 8 witnesses saying that he saw the plates through vision, through a visionary experience. And this is all in the context, this 1838 period. After the Kirtland Bank had failed, and there were apostates in Kirtland meeting in the temple and talking about whether they should reject Joseph Smith's leadership, or that if their rejection should include the Book of Mormon or not include the Book of Mormon. Whether Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet or a fake prophet. So Martin Harris got up, and he believed that they should still believe in the Book of Mormon as one of the 3 witnesses. And this meeting was reported by Stephen Burnett. And Stephen Burnett wrote a letter to Lyman Johnson in Missouri to tell him about the meeting. He said, the last pedestal for him was taken out when Martin Harris admitted in public that no one had seen the plates with their natural eyes, in other words. And so that was the last pedestal. And then an example of how apologists think, as Richard Anderson, the late Richard Anderson here, is that once Burnett has decided to be a disbeliever, and that nothing he says after that can be unbiased. I get that all the time, that I'm a critic and you're biased and you can't, more or less see anything in an unbiased way. And so I usually ask people, at what point when I was a believer did I become biased? You have to, at some point you have to disbelieve. Anyway, they set up a circular definition of a non-believer, so it's sort of like a whistleblower. This is what companies do. He's a whistleblower. He's sour grapes. He's a former employee. We fired him, so you can't believe anything he says. So in other words, there can be no testimony or no credible critic in their minds, because you automatically become an untrustworthy a witness as soon as you leave or disbelieve, or we excommunicated you, and so you have an axe to grind. So, and that's the way it works. Anyway, so they protect themselves that way. So they try to do the same thing with Stephen Burnett. He's biased, and so his reporting of heresies is no good. Well, the problem with that is that Harris was also reported by Warren Parrish in a local newspaper as saying the same thing. That Harris stood up and said, no one, this newspaper quotes, no one has seen the plates except in vision through the eye of faith. That's what Harris was reported in the newspaper by Warren Parrish. So we have two people saying the same thing. Then we have Hyrum Smith. He goes down to Sunbury, Ohio, and while he's at Sunbury, Ohio in 1838, evidently he was asked about his testimony. He's one of the 8 witnesses, Hyrum Smith, right? And so this word is getting around. It's not just a random misunderstanding. This is what the dissidents in Kirtland are proclaiming with Martin Harris's help, okay? And Martin Harris knows the witnesses really well, and he's saying it while they're alive still and can contradict them. Well, Richard Anderson quoted Hyrum Smith's statement in Sunbury, Ohio, and he said, Hyram's kind of defensive about being asked, and he says, I only have 2 eyes and 2 hands. Well, that's no answer. He isn't saying, I saw them with my natural eyes. He's saying the same thing David Whitmer said, which was, of course we saw them with our natural eyes, but they were prepared to see them, meaning it was their spiritual eyes. There are other eyes seeing things without their natural eyes being used. So more or less, what Hyrum Smith did when he made that statement was confirm that these questions are being asked at this time and that they're around, okay? And then it gets to Missouri, and they want to ask John Whitmer, well, John Whitmer, what do you say? And he says, I don't deny my testimony. I saw them through through a supernatural power. So there's plenty of testimony here to give us an understanding of what the 8 witnesses had seen, or in the manner in which they had seen them. Like I explained last time, the testimony of 8 witnesses is a little sketchy on the wording. We testify that we did handle and see for ourselves. And they turned we handled each leaf, whatever that. It didn't say each leaf. We handled. Maybe it does say each leaf. I'd have to look it up. Anyway, it makes it sound. It's a little vague and ambiguous, some of the wording in the testimony of 8 witnesses. And Harris had said the 8 witnesses didn't see them with their eyes, meaning their natural eyes, and hesitated to sign the instrument, meaning the formal testimony, and only persuaded to sign it. So what really happened, the historical event is kind of lost because it doesn't give a date. It doesn't give a time. It doesn't say the manner in which it happened. It doesn't say Joe Smith brought the plates, uncovered, set them on the log, or whatever was there, or whatever. However, some of the paintings nowadays don't have the log. They have Joe Smith holding him on his knee, because I pointed out that the log is not mentioned in any historical document. But So there's no description of any circumstance of exactly how it took place, and you can't reconstruct it from this general statement that's meant to unify various experiences. And I use the testimony of 3 witnesses as a way of warning us that if we only had the testimony of 3 witnesses and we tried to reconstruct it, we would have all 3 witnesses together with Joseph Smith, and well, Joseph Smith's not even mentioned. So we wouldn't even have Joseph Smith in it. We have 3 witnesses, an angel coming down literally, showing them the plates, and that's it. But through other subsequent statements, we learn that Martin Harris wasn't with the other witnesses. He had his experience separately, that
he tried to see what the others were seeing, but he couldn't see it. And that he had to be sort of like helped an additional time to see it, which again suggests that it wasn't a physical visitation, right?
You're right. David Whitmer, in subsequent statements, makes it absolutely clear that there was a haze. He says in one of these statements, but a statement, Henry Moyle, Henry D. Moyle.
Yeah.
He was a attorney, a student to become an attorney. So he was pretty good interviewer, probably. And he quotes he quotes David Whitmer saying that it was something of a soft haze. And then Moyle writes in his diary that he was disappointed by the answer. So it was an apparition, which opens itself up to whether it was an hallucination or not. So,
yeah, but and this all ties to some scripture somewhere that says no man can look upon the Father with his natural eyes and live, right? And so they have to, they can't claim they just outright, or in their minds they can't even believe that they just outright saw God or heavenly messengers. It's got to be in with spiritual eyes. That's where that's what creates the need for this notion of spiritual eyes, in addition to the fact that they probably know on some level that they're not seeing these things.
Well, they know it's a special seeing.
Yeah.
There are some hallucinations. There's like 150 causes of hallucination, but in religion, they're common. I mean, hallucination type experiences, and there one kind of hallucination could be where you see something and you think it's real, and then there's another kind of hallucination where it's something different about it than an actual seeing, and that's the type that the 3 witnesses had. Was a waking dream, some people call it, and
Graham Palmer referred to it as second sight, which he's coming up with that term, right?
That gets to the tradition, the religious tradition, all through all time and all cultures, is that they try to induce a certain state in which they can receive spiritual experiences. And, they believe that they're authentic, real spiritual experiences, whereas they could also be a hallucination. And one of the criteria for whether someone is susceptible to either hypnosis or spiritual experiences is whether they've had spiritual experiences before. And Joseph Smith happened to pick 3 people who had spiritual experiences before. Martin Harris is probably the leader in that category because he saw lots of things. He's quite religious eccentric. And David Whitmer had seen an angel in the field just before he went and became part of saw the plates. He saw an angel telling him that he is called to be one of these witnesses. And he had other experiences too. So their minister said that the Whitmers were great believers in witches and things like that. And Oliver Cowdery had that dream of the plates before he even met Joseph Smith. The Lord had showed him the plates. And that's why he was really on fire. Lucy said, couldn't talk about anything else. He was very obsessed with the subject. Even they thought he was obsessed, more obsessed than they were, and that's saying something. So he had 3 perfect subjects to work with. And he didn't have to succeed. All the Book of Mormon predicted was, in ether anyway, was that there would be 3 special witnesses. They could have come at any time, any place. After a while, he had more than 3. I mean, it could have been anybody. Could have been Mary Whitmer even. And the odd thing is that on the way from what helped with, several things helped as suggestions of what they would experience and see. And one odd thing is that on the way from Pennsylvania to Fayette, on the road, Whitmer says that he saw a man, and this man had something in a sack on his back, and it was walking alongside of the wagon. And they offered a ride, and he said something like, "No, I'm on my way." And Whitmer remembered years later that it was Cumorah, and that he hadn't heard that name, Cumorah, before. And
I thought that was Cain.
Well, I don't think it was a hallucination, though. But I think it was just some guy. It could have been a Bible in the backsack, in the sack. But they drove on past this guy, and then they got this weird feeling, and they all looked back, and the guy was gone. They didn't know where he went. Well, the guy could have walked off the road somewhere, and it was just a coincidence that Joseph Smith seized on. And Joseph Smith, so Whitmer says, "What happened to the guy?" And they look to Joseph, to explain it. And Joseph says, that was Moroni with the plates, So the man was a little man dressed in this weird outfit with a beard, a little gray beard, like angels usually have. And so that became the angel, that guy that they saw. That was the suggestive cue. And so when Whitmer got home, he said he felt a strange feeling that the angel was under the shed. And Joseph Smith confirmed that, the plates are under the shed. And the angel being under the shed, kind of, only way I can explain it is somehow they are linking it to that story of something like a toad in the bottom of the box rising up into the shape of a man and striking Joseph Smith at the second visit, or the first visit, I can't remember which right now. But to be under the shed, so it would, to me, imply maybe this angel transforms itself. But so when Mary Whitmer went out to the shed the next day to get some milk, she knows the plates are under the shed. She has a vision and she sees this old man with the beard, just like David described. And so that becomes a suggestion. So Joseph Smith, there's already 3 witnesses, counting himself at this point. There's him, Mary Whitmer, and Oliver Cowdery. So, but he wants 3 special witnesses. Well, these 3 guys, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, they start teasing Joseph Smith to become these special witnesses that the Book of Mormon talks about. So Joseph Smith says, well, they could try. It doesn't mean he has to succeed at this point, or it doesn't mean that all of them have to succeed either. I mean, if Harris never saw the plates, they would just find someone else eventually, because pretty soon he had all sorts of people having visions of the plates. So they go out, and Whitmer says they tried. Nothing happened. Then they were sitting on a log conversing with each other. About what? What are they? And then all of a sudden, Whitmer says, they saw the angel with the plates. So what are they conversing about? It's possible, this is my speculation, that Joseph Smith was leading them through this guided vision. He was a spiritual guide. He's guiding them, much like he did Sidney Rigdon. I see an angel. I see the angel. Whitmer sees the man with the beard. I see the angel. He has the plates. He's turning the plates over. I see the engravings. What do you see? I see them too, And so he leads them through this spiritual exercise. But Whitmer says it was a haze that he saw this vision through. That the surrounding, the atmosphere around them disappeared and changed. So it was a whole vision. It wasn't the angel in the woods coming down by, as a literal person there in the woods. They were seeing this in the eyes of their imagination, is what Joseph Smith used when he described the vision he and Sidney Rigdon had. And so Joseph Smith would be the unifier between him and Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer. Then he would go to Martin Harris. And why couldn't Martin Harris have a vision by himself? Why did Joseph Smith have to be there? Joseph Smith has to be there. He's the guide. He's helping them see the vision. And they see it in their own way. But nobody knows if they saw the same plates, the same angel, they just see the objects as Joseph Smith describes them. Or not. If they don't see them, no one's gonna say, oh, it's a fake religion.
Right.
So in Lourdes, you have the 3 children that see Mary. Other people have gone to Lourdes and saw the Virgin Mary. And there's been other, suggestion is a very real thing. Suggestion works. You see it working in revivals now, where the minister will cause people to lose power and fall backwards, and there's guys ready to catch them, and that's all suggestive, and the minister, motions to fall back, and they fall back. Sometimes they're just playing along. Sometimes they really lose power and fall back because they're very highly suggestive people. And this is hypnotism works a similar way. I use hypnotism as a model. It's not, Joseph Smith's not hypnotizing them. Brian Hales put out a video trying to combat my description of what could have happened to the 3 and 8 witnesses. And he has it like a pocket watch hypnotist guy. That's not the way hypnotism works. That's stage hypnotism's not the same thing as hypnotherapy. And so they have like tests to see if people are highly suggestible about, usually they'll ask you to imagine your hand as, imagine your hand as being light, that, If you feel your hand getting lighter, don't resist it. Just let it happen. And this is how they find people that are highly suggestive, and their hand will rise, and it feels like they're not doing it. This is the ideomotor reflex thing, kind of, where the rod moves and they think the rod's doing it by itself.
It's like Ouija boards. It's like the rod. And in
Kreskin's little pendulum.
And even in Utah these days, there's this muscle memory phenomenon. Have you heard about muscle memory?
No.
Where people I've never done it or seen it, but apparently people pay money where they put their arms out and they're asked various questions, and the person who has the ability to do muscle memory will push down the arms, and if the arms fall versus stay up, somehow that's telling them important things about their past or their present or their future or their history, almost like fortune telling, and they call it muscle memory, right?
Yeah, I guess. There's other little tricks that do that muscle memory about pushing against the door, and then you stand away from the door and your arms will rise.
Right.
So they have tests to see how susceptible you are to hypnosis. And Joseph Smith is drawing from a community that attracts people that have these spiritual experiences because they don't feel like they fit other places. I mean, they were having, in revivals at Joseph Smith's day, the falling power, people being transported into heaven and having heavenly visions. These kind of suggestive examples of suggestion were around Joseph Smith. I feel he discovered it by accident while money digging, when he would suggest the money's moving. Some people would report that they heard it moving through the ground, and I think he discovered, people seeing the guardian spirit, things like that.
Right.
So that's the three witnesses. Their experience is no different than Lourdes or other situations. We know humans hallucinate. You can't deny that humans hallucinate. I mean, everybody knows that sometimes people see things that aren't there or hear things that aren't being spoken. And they're not all crazy people either. They're perfectly natural, normal people. People that speak in tongues, they've done glossolalia, they've done studies on these people, and in every other way, they score normal, the same as normal people. And they operate normally. They go into a Pentecostal meeting and they start speaking in tongues, and they're perfectly normal people before and after, enduring. So, These are just things people over the centuries have discovered that humans do, and charlatans can exploit.
And anyone who wants to rely on the witnesses as their testimonies being evidence that the Book of Mormon is credible, have to explain, especially Martin Harris and the Whitmers, their tendency to believe anything, any vision. They go on, as I understand it, to believe James Strang's claims about seeing an angel and having plates. They come out of the treasure-seeking tradition of anxiously engaging in clearly fraudulent activities, whether they're sincere believers or not, of seeing, spirits and treasure in the ground. So they clearly have the ability and the interest and the history of claiming to see things that aren't real to the, in any material sense. And so you if you're going to say, well, the witnesses were just so credible, then you have to explain all the other non-Mormon approved or LDS approved claims of visionary activities that the witnesses themselves had in other contexts with James Strang and others. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would you could bring up that kind of stuff, but Richard Anderson used to focus on whether these were trustworthy witnesses, and he would make them very credible people. Martin Harris is a honest farm worker. He was somewhat skeptical. He was a skeptical witness. Oliver Cowdery was a school teacher, a very rational person, which, some of these things aren't exactly true. But David Whitmer, he had integrity. When somebody tried to say that he had denied his testimony, he went to great lengths to reaffirm it in his late life. This is as if, like I said, people who have these experiences are in every other way perfectly normal people. And no one's saying that they're lying or that they were dishonest or that a school teacher, people that can be highly educated and still have these experiences. Whether you are susceptible to hypnosis or suggestion, we shouldn't say hypnosis, it sounds too formal. Although they were going through a religious exercise and they were trying really hard to have this experience, and they were being inducted into a trance state, a hypnotic state, through a religious exercise like they have for thousands of years. And so it's as if, somebody that people that can have these experiences are of all walks of life. There is no immunity. There's no I'm too educated to be or whatever. As a whole society, you might find fewer of them because of we're more sophisticated in certain ways. But Joseph Smith attracted certain personalities to his message. They were open to his message. They had experienced things themselves. So these were highly fertile subjects to work with.
And that just goes back to the term magic worldview. They all had a magic worldview rooted in superstition, which made them candidates for the potential to see anything, right?
Well, if you're in a certain environment that rewards these kinds of experiences, then there will be more of them, of course. If you have like the providential view of history, and you think God is manipulating things, you will see God manipulating things all over the place. Doesn't mean you're crazy. It's just that you're using this interpretive scheme to see the world, and you will see a lot of stuff and interpret a lot of stuff different than someone that doesn't have that scheme, that prism to look at the world through.
Right. We're getting a lot of questions from our listeners. If it's okay, I want to have you answer some listener questions directly. Aaron Gluth Spencer writes, what do you say to someone that says Oliver Cowdery never denied his testimony to the Book of Mormon? How do you I know you've kind of addressed that indirectly, but what would you say to someone who said that's proof enough that the Book of Mormon is what it claims to? Oliver Cowdery ends up getting excommunicated by Joseph Smith, incidentally, for discovering Joseph's adultery with Fanny Alger and calling him on it.
That's right.
Joseph gets mad and excommunicates him. A critic would say, an apologist would say, well, just the fact that Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated by Joseph Smith, was kicked out of the church, but never recanted on his testimony is a proof enough that the Book of Mormon is clearly a historical document and a work of God. What would you say to that claim? Thanks, Aaron, for the question.
Yeah, well, that's Richard Anderson. His approach was to build up the witnesses as much as he can as being trustworthy. And so if we were to take his word on worldly things, in a court of law, they would do just fine, But we're talking about religious experiences, and so they believe they were real, just like any religious person. It doesn't mean that the experience was real. Now, they knew it was an unusual experience, like David Whitmer talking about the soft haze, seeing the vision through the soft haze and all that. They knew it was an unusual religious experience, but it doesn't mean you can't take that and say, therefore, it was a real angel. Well, as a scholar, I can't say whether it was real or fake, but I can say if the Book of Mormon's not history, there were no Nephites, there were no plates, there were no plates buried, there was no Nephite to come and appear to the three witnesses. So how do you explain what the three witnesses experienced? This is an explanation. You can't prove it because, it's an experience just like any other experience. Now, some people say, scholars can't talk about religious experiences or visions. Scholars can talk about visions. Visions are historical events. Visions are historical events, and we could talk about visions as like we could talk about any historical event. If a historian can talk about whether or not some historical event took place in the past, we can talk about, well, what's the evidence for the witnesses seeing their vision? Because that happened in time and space. They were there in Fayette, kneeling in the woods or in the field or wherever it was. And they said they saw something. Well, if they saw the angel Moroni or they saw, somebody else walking across the field, the evidence is the same. Who cares? So scholars can talk about visions, but we can't say whether it was a real angel sent by God or not. We can say that it could be it fits the description of a hallucination, and which is one reason the D&C 17 is that revelation given just before the three witnesses went and saw their vision, said that they will see them through the eye of faith, but they are to testify that they saw them the same as Joseph Smith has seen them. So by the power of God. So that revelation is encouraging them to make the vision sound less spiritual and more matter of fact. This is the way Richard Anderson said it. It was a supernatural experience, meaning the angel came down from heaven and stood right there in the woods. Well, Richard Anderson didn't pay attention to the whole array of testimony. He tried to narrow it down to just the written testimony mostly. And then he just emphasizes after that they reaffirmed their written testimony. The same thing with the 8 witnesses. They reaffirmed their testimony in the Book of Mormon, but they never really want to discuss all of the evidence of what kind of experience it was. What kind of experience was it that they're reaffirming? And you can't get it from just reading the written testimonies. You have to read all of the testimonies and consider all of the evidence. So, so anyway, it fits, plausibly fits an hallucination or a real vision. It's not how Richard Anderson described it as a natural supernatural experience. So the possibility that it's a hallucination is there. The witnesses have a predisposition for visionary experiences, so they're highly suggestive witnesses. That's all you can do. So
Right.
if you reject the Book of Mormon as history, then you have an alternate explanation for what the witnesses experienced. Mormon apologists want to tout the witnesses as evidence for the Book of Mormon, whereas it's not.
Right. Yeah. And so for people who want to say that Oliver Cowdery was a co-conspirator, that he helped write the book, that he was in on the fraud, we've already talked about this in the first Book of Mormon 3 hours. You believe Joseph Smith was the lone author. You don't believe Oliver Cowdery was in on a fraud. You believe that when he was translating, he literally thought he was translating Joseph's inspired work, correct?
I think that's most likely what happened. I mean, Oliver Cowdery is willing to participate in the religious deception in the stories of the Urim and Thummim being used in translation, Peter, James, and John the Baptist. I believe he's willing to get in on the deception and to hold the church together. At what point he crossed that line, I don't know. He could have been all along that way. I kind of doubt it, though, because he was so, obsessed with the subject, according to Lucy. And so I would say that it's unnecessary for Cowdery to be involved. It seems that he came and he tried to be compete with Joseph Smith and translate part of the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith gave him a chance to do that, but he failed. And Joseph Smith knew he was going to fail. And then he gave an excuse for why Cowdery failed, and then said there's other records for Cowdery, so that Cowdery could go off and translate his own thing and not threaten Joseph Smith's, the integrity of what Joseph Smith was doing with his book. So it seems to me that there's a competition, and that several places in the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith puts Cowdery in his place, that he is the spokesperson for the great seer of the latter days, and that later it occurred that where Cowdery was willing to use deception with Joseph Smith. So So Joseph Smith doesn't need anyone to help him, is my position. He can do it alone. Why would he need Cowdery to help him?
Okay. And so that makes Cowdery's persistent testimony just sincere. He felt like he had seen a vision and he believed it, right?
But yeah.
A lot of people.
Oh, we forgot to address why they never denied it. Well, they never denied it because they were true believers.
Yeah.
Why would they deny it?
Yeah. A lot of nowadays, a very common thing for post-Mormons and Americans to experiment with is hallucinogens or entheogens, things like peyote or ayahuasca or LSD. And even Michael Pollan, the famous author, recently has written a book supporting a measured, controlled, thoughtful use of hallucinogenics to treat things like trauma and anxiety and depression. And so, in my view, because hallucinogenic use amongst post-Mormons is becoming so prevalent, I'm getting contacted all the time by post-Mormons that want to find the use of entheogens, and I'm going to entheogens. The definition I'll read right here: a chemical substance typically of plant origin that is ingested to produce a non-ordinary state of consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. These people that contact me want to find that Joseph himself or Joseph's followers used entheogens to help induce, hypnotic or hallucinogenic states that then can be used to explain, whether it's the Kirtland miracles or some of these visions. Have you studied it all? And some even, and of course, Native Americans or these Moundbuilders will have used peyote for centuries, if not more, in their religious ceremonies. So there clearly existed hallucinogenics or entheogens at the time of the Book of Mormon. So have you studied this potential or real use of entheogens around the time of the Book of Mormon's creation and around the time of the creation of Mormonism? And if so, have you found any credible ties to Mormonism, and or do you see any credibility to these, entheogenic theories surrounding the foundation of Mormonism?
Okay. So my view is that modern minds have a hard time grasping this religious mindset of Joseph Smith's day. And so that the only way they think that they can explain the phenomenon is through drugs. So it sort of is an unnecessary hypothesis again. Suggestion does the same thing, basically. The power of suggestion. The religious, getting into the religious frame of mind, and this is where I think a more fruitful area of study would be in neurotheology. And researchers have studied parts of the brain where religious experience comes from. It has nothing to do with drugs. Humans have the ability to do it, some more than others. And, the limbic system in the brain, there's a part that appeals to religious people and a different part that where it derived from the brain is for spirituality. Feeling religious is not necessarily the same as feeling spiritual. So the feelings come from there, and there are certain historians that try to explain, or did. I don't know if it's popular anymore. They tried to explain the Salem witches with ergot poisoning, and ergot was a drug that they used. It's a kind of a mold that grows on wheat, and so the theory was that some of the wheat got tainted with this ergot and got ingested in Salem, and the witches started having hallucinations, and that was one theory, and that's kind of been borrowed and reformed in different settings, and I think one of them is early Mormonism. And they did have ergot. They did use ergot in Nauvoo for one of the trials in Nauvoo for where a woman died giving birth, and the ergot was mentioned in association with that. I do definitely think alcohol, though, was probably a contributing factor during the Kirtland endowment, the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, and they used to honor the Lord's Supper as in the same fashion as they did in ancient times, where they as much bread, it was a meal, much bread, and drank as much wine as they wanted. And in some of the situations, Joseph Smith has them, the elders in the temple, fasting and then drinking. That's pretty. That would break down a lot of resistance and barriers, maybe, and make people more susceptible to religious experience. But I don't think Joseph Smith had to lean on that, because I think these were people that were having hallucinations anyway. But there's no evidence of any entheogens, or whatever you call it.
Okay.
That I know of, besides that ergot. But I've never heard of anybody using it before a spiritual experience. One time, Parley P. Pratt, there's many things that can induce hallucination. I have a book that has like 150 ways of hallucinating. So one of them's like fasting, lowering your blood sugar level can cause hallucinations. And one is fatigue, sleep deprivation. And one vision Parley P. Pratt writes about, he was definitely fatigued before he had this hallucination. Anyway, there's the varieties of religious experience. I mean, there's so many, really. Everybody, and there's so many personalities and people you're dealing with. Things are happening inevitably in a community that prizes and rewards religious experience. And Joseph Smith didn't have a shortage of religious experience. At first, he had a problem with too much religious experience when in Ohio, people were falling down and barking and carrying on like they did at some revivals, or they were imitating the Lamanites or pretending like they were preaching to Lamanites. They were pretending like they're speaking Indian dialects. And it was going on and on. And Joseph Smith had to rein that in. Joseph Smith had to rein in the charisma, and called it the spirit of the devil, as deceiving people and bring some order to the situation.
So if you surround yourself with people inclined to having visionary experiences, if you reward people for having them, and if you create the conditions and the teachings that incent all this, you're naturally going to get that as the outcome. And you don't even need entheogens to produce it. You can have fasting, you can have, pressure, you can have social pressure.
Suggestion.
You can have just suggestion.
Highly suggestible people. So yeah, I don't see a need to go there to explain the Book of Mormon. It doesn't hallucinations and things didn't produce the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith, like I said, I don't believe he saw any of that stuff.
Got it. Okay. That's super useful.